Guys, welcome to World War III, another episode here. Want to get to a pretty disturbing article on the Chinese military, their growth, their expansion, and all of it. It's a pretty crazy article, but the first thing I wanted to talk about, the White House press secretary, Jen Psaki, says that reassignment surgery, puberty blockers for kids is the best practice. States preventing it will be held accountable. So this is a very complicated topic. How young is too young if, a 7 or 8 year old says, listen, I want to get on hormone growth or whatever, a guy transitioning from a girl doing that. How young is too young? Because I've heard it both ways. I've heard kids grow up and say, at the age of 8, oh my God, I'm so glad I didn't have to experience male puberty. They did the male to female transformation. They're, very happy with it, and they're glad they didn't have to go through any male puberty. They're glad they got on the stuff, the reassignment surgery at the age of 8, the age of 9, the hormone blockers, things like that. And then I've also heard it where these young kids get, real in the moment. They're very small. They have, very little brain capacity and very little understanding of the world. And they make the decision to get on, growth hormone or something. And 3 years later, they're like, what the hell am I doing? So I've seen it both ways. At the end of the day, I think the one thing we need is we need a study. We need a legitimate study done of kids, I would say 13 and under, that did decide to go through this reassignment surgery, hormone blockers, whatever, testosterone boost, things like that. And then what percentage of those kids regret it, love it, things like that. It's a very complicated issue when people say, oh, you've got to have the kids should be able to decide at the age of 8. That's just narrow-minded thinking. And then you've got people saying kids should never decide. But you have stories where you've got the horror story of kids saying, when I was 8 years old, why did my parents allow me to do this? Now I'm 15. It's like, how young is too young for a child to come out and say, hey, I'm a girl, get me a reassignment surgery? It's a very complicated situation. If I had a kid and they came to me at the age of 8 or 9, I would be very hesitant to do anything. I would at least wait until 13, 14, maybe even later than that. I mean, I don't even know. I'm just speculating. But I think like if I had an 8 or 9 year old son or daughter and they're like, I'm a girl, I'm like, let's calm down. I mean, you're 8. I mean, guys, like 5 years ago, the things that I thought in my head 5 years ago compared to now are so different. Like, that is just such a major step. And Democrats want it to be black and white. Republicans want it to be black and white. You can see both sides to where, yeah, if your 8-year-old kid comes to you and says, I'm actually a girl, you kind of laugh at it. Like, you have zero perspective on life. You're not making that big decision at that young age. But then you also have the scenario to where if you don't let them and they feel like they're in the wrong body because, that's a thing. It is a thing, I guess. That's like torture to them. That's like a torture to a human being. If I'm a male, but I feel like a female and you're not allowing me to transition, it's a whole thing. And I think we need legitimate studies of kids 15 and under, 13 and under, whatever the age is. How many of those kids, what percentage regret it? And what percentage are extremely happy with their decision to make the transition at the young age. So it's a very complicated thing. It's not black and white. And here's another, oh my goodness. Teacher says 20 of 32 fourth grade students have come out to her as LGBTQIABCDEFG plus. That teacher should be fired immediately. That is horrible. And 20 out of 32. So basically the students are peer pressured into coming out as gay or queer. That is terrible, and that teacher needs to be fired. There's no joke. There's no, oh, you're anti-trans. That is awful. And it's clear that woman is pressuring those young kids in that classroom to be gay or to be queer. Horrible. I saw that, and I was so just disgusted, and hopefully that woman got fired immediately. If I was the superintendent or principal, I would be like, what are you talking about? I wonder what class I wonder what grade that is. That has to be like second or third grade. That'd be very interesting to see, but I'm guessing like early elementary school. And then we've got this with our favorite doctor. Dr. Fauci says it's likely the U.S. will see a rise in cases in the fall. Guys, when it comes to Dr. Fauci, I really feel bad for the medical community because this dude has completely tarnished their reputation. The only way Dr. Fauci is relevant is if cases in America rise. There's really only, well, I guess the pharmaceutical companies like it as well, but you want to know the one person that wants cases to rise in America because it'll help with his popularity? It's Dr. Fauci. Why don't we just silence this dude? It's obvious he loves attention, and if the cases go back up, he'll be on CNN Monday morning talking about what a bad job the American public is doing at not socially distancing, at not wearing their masks. Why do we give this dude attention? Why don't we get someone that actually legitimately wants to give the citizens medical advice, doesn't want publicity? It's clear Fauci does all these media events. He throws out first pitches. It's disgusting, and he's given medical doctors horrible reputations. And I'm guessing many medical doctors hate this dude because it is terrible. And the only way this dude stays relevant is if the cases go back up, which is what no normal American wants, obviously. But just to see this dude talk about, oh, the cases are going back up. Yeah, we really need that. He wants to be relevant. That's the way he's going to be relevant. And then I thought this was a really good point. Neil deGrasse Tyson came out and said some, standard anti-white European saying. He tweeted about European colonial history in 6 words. Is that yours? It's mine now. So he's referencing what happened with the Europeans to the Native Americans in the United States. And this is such a good response. And this is the response I always talk about when people talk about how we took land from the Native Americans. It's human history. The Bushmen would say the same thing about the Bantu, the Persian, about the Egyptian, most of the world about Genghis Khan. And then they're like, yes, we took the land from the Incas. And the Incas took it from the Bati, and the Batis took it from the, whatever other Indian. This is human nature. This is what we do. We're tribal people. We conquer. That is what we do. The Europeans coming into America and doing what they did, it's not, back in those times, was not rare at all, but we view it with a 21st century lens. It's like, oh, they're horrible, white people are terrible, when that was a common practice. Think about the Vikings, all those type of people in those eras. Scavengers. That's what we did back then. If we could take something and try and turn it into a better land, we were going to do it. And that's what happened. And you hear these people, oh, you took land from the Native Americans. It's like, what about every other country? How did they form? What about the Native American tribes when they had their land? That's just the way the world works. It's so annoying. And then we've got this new Katie Barnes, a black, queer, and trans they/them, told her Disney colleagues that holding the company accountable means unpacking her own pain. Apparently her pronouns are they/them, but they say her. I'm guessing this is a textbook example of how identity activists use the rhetoric of trauma as a tool for emotional manipulation. I mean, do you want me to reread that tweet? Black, queer, and trans they/them told her Disney colleagues that holding the company accountable means unpacking or they/them, whatever her pronouns are, own pain. I see these tweets and I have to screenshot them. Why are people who don't feel sick still testing? Mass paranoia has become the real sickness. So I don't believe people who don't feel sick are testing at this point. I think what's happening is, due to these local government laws, they're making the corporations test the people before they come into work every day, no matter what. I think that's what's going on. I don't think people are buying tests and just testing, if you feel completely healthy. But because of some of these local governments are so aggressive with the pandemic policies, they force the companies to test the employees every single time they come into work. I think that's mainly why we're seeing maybe a rise in cases among people that don't feel sick at all. Because you've got these local government policies that are so ridiculous, they force you to test everyone no matter if you're feeling completely healthy. And that's the situation with that. Now let's get to this China article. Top general warns about China's military. Here's the context. This is a doozy of an article. China and Russia, and maybe India too, are bent on changing the rules-based current global order, according to America's top general. There's a shock. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs General Mark Milley's prognosis offered on Tuesday as he asked Congress for more money for the Pentagon is an era where large-scale war between major powers is a possibility. Quote, "We are entering a world that is becoming more unstable and potential for significant international conflict between great powers is increasing, not decreasing." So you read something like that, obviously he's asking for a military budget increase. He's going to paint it out to be as bad as possible, but there is some interesting stuff in this article. He actually isn't asking for enough money for the Pentagon, according to many Republicans and some moderate Democrats who noted the Department of Defense didn't properly account for inflation when it requested $773 billion for the 2023 fiscal year. I heard Biden ask for $814. I thought it was moved up to $814 billion for the military. A 4% boost that is less than inflation, which is currently at its highest in 40 years. So they're trying to get the military budget up a little bit more because inflation's so bad and they want it to reflect it. I always think, who is going to be the first person to propose the $1 trillion military budget? That's what I wonder. Very interesting. The threat Russia poses to America's NATO allies in Europe is clear from the invasion of Ukraine, but Milley referred to Russia in the same breath as China. The growth of China's military, particularly its navy, has concerned American defense officials and lawmakers in recent years. So I think that's a very reckless thing to compare China to Russia. It's basically like comparing a minor league team to a major league team. China is so much more advanced than Russia. It is a different beast. And that's why I have proposed and I have preached that we need to focus mainly our attention on the Chinese, while obviously Western Europe, the Western members of NATO, need to be focused on Russia and what they're doing. But to put China and Russia in the same sentence when China's so much more powerful is a little reckless. It's a little reckless for me. A new arms race. An emblem of concerns about U.S. military dominance is the very specific focus in recent weeks on hypersonic missiles. The U.S. has placed a renewed emphasis on hypersonic weapons following successful Russian and Chinese tests in recent months, exacerbating the concern in Washington that the U.S. is falling behind on a military technology considered critical for the future. So if that is true, that's ridiculous. I mean, we're spending basically $400 billion more than China on military. And again, those numbers, China does not report accurate numbers, but it's probably pretty close. The last estimate I saw was the Chinese currently at around 200, maybe 70 billion they spend on military compared to the United States, give or take 750, maybe 800 billion if they can get this inflation thing passed. I originally thought Biden had proposed 814 billion for the military, but apparently it's at 774. But no, if Russia and China, and especially Russia, who spends even less on their military than China, if they have higher tech hypersonic missiles than the United States, that is an extreme failure by the U.S. based on the amount of money we spend. Our technology should be far and away number one. The only combatant would be China. The fact that Russia could potentially have better military technology with these supersonic missiles, these successful launches, our U.S. intelligence is learning of several successful launches. This is very concerning, very concerning. There is a growing narrative, not unlike the one pushed by President Joe Biden, that the U.S. is falling behind to China in its technological capacity. that the U.S. military is falling behind China's unprecedented Chinese military modernization has enabled them to leapfrog us in key capabilities. The Chinese Communist Party now controls the largest army and navy in the world. It has more troops, more ships, and more hypersonic missiles than the United States. Very scary picture there. It does say the idea that China has leapfrogged the United States needs context. It does. It does need context because we still spend way more than China. We still have a greater influence of the world than China due to all of our military bases around. It says China still lags the U.S. considerably in terms of overall spending. Less than half, according to this estimate. Again, they're just estimates. I'd say China's right now at probably about half of the United States in terms of their military budget. But a significant caveat is that U.S. maintains a global presence and has military assets all across the globe. China's forces are much more localized within the region, but it also spends more than Korea, Japan, and Vietnam combined. And those are not, Korea and Japan spend a boatload on the military. So those are not small countries when it comes to military spending. China's military, like Russia's, lacks the human backbone the U.S. military has. The U.S., for better or for worse, has been engaged in conflict around the globe. So that's just about experience, which is a factor. Experience is a factor, and that's why I think China wants Taiwan. They want to give themselves some experience in a military takeover. Also, Taiwan's an extremely important strategical point in the Pacific, but you know, it is good that America does have more experience. How much more? It's not like we've been involved in a massive, multi-country scaled war where we're having to defend the United States in recent history or really ever. So we do have a little bit more experience in terms of, our military. But to say, oh, don't worry, China's almost on our level, but we have more experience, we'll be fine. To me, that's kind of a cop-out. I think there has to be a better way we deal with this. And I think the number one thing we need to do is shore up a massive military alliance with South Korea and Japan, sort of a Pacific NATO. And again, guys, the key thing in this article, they were like, China and Russia are similar. They're not similar. China is a significant bigger threat to America than Russia is. Now, you can make the argument due to unstable power in Russia. Vladimir Putin, nobody knows what he wants to do. There's a little bit of an instability there. They do have the nukes. You could make the argument, well, because Putin is dangerous and unpredictable, they're a bigger threat than what China currently is in terms of just Vladimir Putin. But that has to do with Putin being unstable. When we're talking about just sheer manpower, sheer innovation, sheer growth, China is so, even like where they're located, where the United States is at in the world compared to China, compared to Russia. It's like if you're in Europe, if you're Germany, if you're the United Kingdom, your number one focus, 100%, it should be Russia because you're located not right next to them, but they're very close to you. They are very close to you, and they're threatening, Europe's freedom. So they're your number one threat. But we've got all these people who they want to lump the United States in with Europe and say Russia's our number one threat. No. Russia is Germany's number one threat. Russia is Poland's number one threat. Russia is the Netherlands' number one threat. Russia is Sweden's number one threat. The United States' number one threat is China. And I just want to drill that into people because it's so important. And there's a separation, and I understand the leadership in Russia is unstable, and there's always the thought that nukes get launched, and that's why we got to be scared of Russia. I understand that, but in terms of military power and just influence, total influence in the world, China's economy enables them to be so influential, and it enables them to rapidly grow their military, and you have the completely unhealthy relationship many of these American companies that influence what goes on here You've got these horribly unhealthy relationships where they ship out all the jobs and all the manufacturing takes place in China because it's cheaper. It's slave labor. And all those corporations are obviously going to put a good word in for China here in America because that's where all their crap is being made and that's how they're making a crazy profit. So it's completely unhealthy, and that is why China overall is the number one concern. We understand what's happening with Russia and Ukraine. What Russia did is horrible, and there is unstable leadership that leads to a lot of concerned Americans about what Russia is going to do. There's an unpredictability based off of the actions that Vladimir Putin has made. I understand that, but it's also important to note, just based off of if everything were equal, who is our number one threat? Guys, it's not even close. I mean, I always say it's not even close, but seriously, it's so far and away. China is the number one threat, and I don't like lumping in. I'm saying, I think later down the road, I've said this several times, you're looking at China, Russia, and maybe even India, and then obviously, countries like Syria and North Korea. You're talking about them forming a massive military agreement to rival NATO and actually use the fact that NATO exists as an excuse to make a military agreement to where NATO wouldn't be able to say anything. Otherwise, we would be complete hypocrites. We made this overpowering military agreement with all these countries in Western Europe after World War II, and now China and Russia get on the same page, and maybe even India and North Korea and Syria. And they say, listen, this is ridiculous. This thing they have is so overpowering. We need to create something in the East to rival what they have in the West. And then if we say, no, you can't do that, we're going to be complete hypocrites because we have NATO. So I think that's what's forming here with China, with Russia. Whatever happens in this war with Ukraine, I think it ends in a ceasefire. I think Putin gets a little land, but it's a massive failure for Russia. And I think Russia gets very shelled, and they get very turtled up, and the rest of the world shuns them to the point where they would not want to go into another war without the support of the Chinese in a military agreement like that. So that's what could potentially be happening, guys. It's a very dim article about how, they're talking about China's Army, their Navy. They're putting so much into their Navy. It's not surprising. You look at that coast, right on the coast. Of course, they're going to want to have the strongest Navy in the world. That's where a lot of their money currently is being invested into, according to this article. Guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you're following me on Twitter. Link to that's always in the description. I'm, of course, the Depressed Ginger. Thank you for watching.